right now, but at least I want to know the names of people. So we had chapter 14, correct, from your group. Who would summarize?
We did not, we ran out of time, so we didn't name a summarizer. Anyone from group 14 want to volunteer to play that role? We had a great
Now, you
group
know you
session,
were the
I think.
leader, so I don't know why you playing. Go on and summarize.
So
Um,
it has to be a different person than the person who led it.
There we go. I think you just,
Can you hear me?
So,
who's that? Great.
okay, all right.
Okay,
So
Thanks, I mean.
okay, awesome. So we'll talk about the chapters after our guest lecture today. Julie will be joining us shortly. So we will talk about the chapters at 11 o'clock. So let's say Amin, group 4. Who else? Group 15. How did you guys?
We didn't have anyone from our group volunteer, so I mean I can summarize it unless someone wants to do it from our group. Yeah, so I can do it. That's
Okay, Raven, thanks. And more from your group?
I was gonna do it, but I guess I'm not supposed to do it. Someone else supposed to go. Free.
We'll make sure. Anyone else want to volunteer from Mo's group? Okay. All right, for now, we'll keep you more for it, and we'll do the summaries and discussions of the topics when we came back. You know, I liked from what I saw, like what you guys were discussing, and the types of conversation you had. Every group kind of did it a bit differently. So I'm really glad that you guys are getting very active about your reading and discussing what you are reading. We'll talk about that when we kind of review the summaries. Thank you, Julie, for joining us. So we have our guest lecturer today, Julie Sai, who is joining us. I will briefly introduce you, Julie. Let me share my screen from and feel free to chime in if I've misstate something.
Sure thing.
All right, okay. So Julie has been teaching this course and parts of this course for a while now. She's an author, instructor. She's been in the security industry for 17 plus years. Touched not only just security, but DevOps as well. And if you want to reach out to Julie, here is her LinkedIn. She is going to today cover fundamentals of operating systems and introduce you to file systems. We will do networking next class. But Julie's gonna Julie has developed a fair bit of content for this class around file systems. So she will be covering that today. Anything else you would like to add, Julie?
Just to make sure that everyone's expectations are met. I think so. Today, I was planning on covering that part of the Windows file systems, and then Vaibhav will cover, I think, some of it next week, and then I will also cover some about Unix and then forensics methodology. That's more general. I've also done the network piece of it before. So, but if I understand correctly, the network and memory part is for next week. Is that right, Vaibhav?
It is, but if you feel no, but what I'm saying was, if you feel like you want to talk to it, please go for it. Don't feel like that. I just want to make sure that you have enough time. So
yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Because like with an hour and a half, like we'll definitely have to choose, right? So, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we have a really active class here, Julie. What we've been doing is we just finished our group discussion, but for the readings for each of the chapters.
Yeah.
So coming up on file systems, we have readings as well from the
Okay.
text. So every week, like, we kind of have reading leads, and each chapter we discuss. So, the students are fairly actively involved, and they've been doing the NetLab labs as
Excellent.
well.
really
So a fair bit of hands-on work. What I'll kind of maybe outline here. So we have a I'm not sure if you're part of the college's Discord, but the Discord does have it's quite active in terms of, like, questions students have. But I'm happy to forward some of the questions if you volunteer to answer any of those for the students. But having said that, I'm just really thankful to you, and the class is very thankful that you're taking time to talk about your experiences and go through the content today with us. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, it's always a pleasure to me to get to connect with the students here at Merit. I've really loved hearing the questions and the experience. It helps me also to look at things in a new way. I want to encourage, we just have an hour and a half today, so I'm going to try to move through the content relatively efficiently. And if there's areas that you all would like to double click on and go a little bit deeper, or to ask about context, please feel free. I want it to be open. I noticed that I think I just let's see, I'm trying to log into Discord, and I should have tested that a little bit earlier, but I noticed that there's also a Q&A component to Zoom. So I don't know if the students are able to write questions in there, and if not, like, please feel free to just raise your hands. I would like to encourage people to turn on the camera also, so that, like, we can all see each other, and to engage a little bit. It's obviously not mandatory. And I'll give a real quick summary on my career. Bob is giving me credit for being a little bit younger than I am. I've actually been working in Silicon Valley for about more than 25 years now, and I had early on started working in the network engineering space, and then moved into doing system administration, which I did for about 13 years, 24/7 uptime and that kind of thing. And that's a big part of where I learned the day-to-day practicalities of doing forensics. And then in the last 10 years or so, probably more like 12 or 13 now, I moved into doing management for security and DevOps. And so I've worked at Walmart e-commerce, and was in the second in command for the CISO there. Worked at Box. Most recently, I was the head of security CISO for Roblox, as well as had done head of security and infrastructure roles at several smaller companies as well. I think 6 in total now at this point. So I've seen a lot of different kinds of companies, big ones, little ones, and the processes of, companies going into hypergrowth and IPO listings. I've also seen the reverse cycle, where companies are not making it business wise and on the road to liquidation. So there's all paths are possible in Silicon Valley. So I will, with no further ado, I will get started on, like, going over the material. I will be blunt, like, I've done some Windows forensics, but my strength is more on the Unix side. So if people have, like, questions or clarifications, or have experiences that they want to share, please feel free to, raise your hands. So. So I'm going to share my screen, and so I'm going to keep the I'm I'm going to keep the Q&A panel open here. I don't know if you're able to add questions, please feel free to, or to just raise your hand and we can go from there. So let me share this window. There we go. So this is the portion of the Windows presentation that we'll go over today. Vaibhav will plug in some of the holes on the rest of it next week, as there's 2 parts to it. This is mostly about file system and file system artifacts. As all of you may have had experience either in hands-on or your reading or your labs, a really critical part of handling computer forensics has to do with knowing what's on the computer, and as well as knowing how to retrieve metadata, how to retrieve files that have been changed or are in the process of being deleted, and also tracking user activity on the host as well. And so in order to do all of that, you really need to understand what are the parts, the key files and logs and registries that are going to give you that critical information on, what's changed and when. It's very easy. I would say that there are I would say 2 major kinds of things you have to keep in mind when you're handling forensics. And for definition purposes, forensics is the doing the investigation on what happened in either a event or to files and data on the systems. And I would say one very critical aspect of it is preservation of data, or preservation of the artifact. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, about chain of custody and how to make sure that you have intact copies and have the tools you need to investigate what you need to, but at the same time are not altering or tampering with what may ultimately be evidence that has to be used in more formal investigation or court. The second thing I think it's very important to keep in mind when you are on you are on an active investigation and there is a time pressure, either because you're trying to catch actions in the moment, or to identify bad actors before they destroy their evidence, or otherwise, is to be selective and targeted about how you identify critical information, right? So on the one hand, you want to have a wide net and have all the things that you need, but on the other hand, you also want to be able to sort through the sea of information that's there and stay focused on exactly what you need to and what is truly unusual and telling you something versus something that is might be noise. So those are the 2 themes I want you to keep in mind as we're going through the materials and the ways that you can do it. And I see a question from Q&A. I would love to hear what tools you currently use for forensics on Linux and Unix. If there's time after the Windows portion, absolutely. Let me just make a note to myself that since we have until 11 o'clock, that to make sure to get to that by at least 10:30. Okay. Let's see. And then Craig asks, are you mostly investigating outside attacks from hackers or internal users? Great question. I think that it's important to say that it could be both, and that when you're in the middle of an investigation, don't be really clear about what you suspect and what you can prove, right? So when we talk about threat, if it's an internal attacker or internal user, and sometimes it's a well-meaning but accident-prone user, right? We call that insider threat, right? External threats are actors and networks that are coming from outside of your organization. In the beginning, the evidence and the breadcrumbs should be relatively the same on both sides. With external threats, you might do a little bit more of digging in terms of threat intelligence on more hidden and external forums. But in the beginning, what you're looking for is anomalous, unusual behavior, either in terms of access patterns, files changing, performance. I was just sitting at a talk the other day where they determined that there was malware in some of the core system or SSH libraries based on the fact that SSH logins were taking half a second too long. And the way that they picked up on that was that there was like very, very sort of hyper attentive developers that were just very actively using their stuff and getting impatient about like, why is this taking just a little bit too long? And it was important for the people involved not to dismiss the complaint, to say like, hey, it could be anything, network or computer. I guess it happened enough that they dug in, and because of that, they figured out that there was some malware that was embedded deep down. So anything that looks unusual, whether it's a pattern of connected things or just one or two things. So, all right, let's move through our deck so I can get you the materials you need to, right? So the topics that we're going to talk about today, at least on the Windows portion, and is extensible to the Unix portion up to an extent, is attribution in terms of who and what is doing something. The recycle bin, which in the Windows world is the queued up for trash or deletion, right? And using the, so I think that I would characterize that as files that are pending change or deletion, wherever that might be. Metadata, so file information that's very, very critical in terms of timestamps, alterations, owners, permissions changing, logs of those kinds of things. That those things can be even, those to me are sort of the bread and butter of the data that you're looking for, because a lot of times the actual contents of the files themselves, it could be anything, right? Like, and if you're investigating a forensic incident, usually what you're looking at something is it may be some fresh new topic, a new department, like a new trail of things that they do. And on some level, you don't necessarily care what the content is, just that like, did it change in ways that it wasn't supposed to? And that metadata is your key to figuring out who accessed and changed things and what tools could legitimately be doing those things and which ones aren't. Thumbnail images, right? So I think, images and binary files are also a special subject in forensics, because there's only so much information you're going to get out of that, and you have to be able to have safe quarantined areas in order to detonate them, as we say, and to like see what might be hidden or how they might be executed. And you also have to think expansively about how users might accidentally use something or what they normally use, right? Like, so it could be the case that an attacker might embed a binary or a some sort of marker, like in something as innocuous as an image file, and they'll know that someone had accessed a page or connected on a link just based on whether or not that particular file had been touched or retrieved. There's a lot of things that people do with those kinds of things that can be less apparent. Most recently used lists, also along those lines of what was most recently addressed, I will extend that to say logs, right? So logs and history files, which are also used in the Unix world in terms of seeing who accessed things and in what ways. Restore points and shadow copies. This is important also in terms of knowing if data is moving through your systems or networks in ways that are not sanctioned and might have other purposes, and knowing where people might be exfiltrating data to move it out of the network, or if people or actors have been saving copies to cover up their tracks, right? So there's different things that you have to kind of put together in terms of all the creative and unsanctioned ways that someone might be using something. Prefetch and link files, those can also be critical in terms of knowing, sorry, went a little bit too fast, can also be critical in terms of, you know, showing like where something might be, someone might have tried to reconstruct something in a certain way or tried to point users in a direction that they don't. You know, a very common thing in terms of getting users to, innocent users to detonate malware or a payload that is in the system is to disguise it with names or things that seem innocuous and valid, right? And I think that, you know, in the talk that I was attending yesterday, like one term for that is dependency confusion. So sometimes malware packages or hacked files might be embedded or replacing different parts of dependent packages, and those things might be named something that looks legitimate, so that either the programs or the users will try to leverage them or run them thinking that they're the real thing. So, you know, at the high level, those are things that are great targets for someone who is trying to get users to do something that that maybe is not in the interest of, that is in the interest of compromising the system or the network. Let's see, hold on just a moment. And all right. So moving on to attribution. Evidence of an action is easy to find. You can use different kinds of, hi, did someone, so evidence of an action is relatively easy to find, right? Like certain history files and actions and logs will show that. Attribution is certainly more difficult. Who was logged in as that account, who has legitimate uses for accounts that might touch or execute that file, and knowing who that is. These days, with as many services that are interconnected as they are, and like API usage and lots of third-party vendor software, very often the case is that applications or files, especially in a production context, might be used by many users that are automated, that other developers or users might have login credentials to, and it's not immediately transparent, or super user elevated administrator privileges that are conferred to different service accounts that, again, have to be deducted through that train. So there is an important aspect of understanding your IAM, identity and authentication management context, in order to do effective attribution. The more contained and controlled the systems are, the more disciplined that the enterprise has been, the easier that process might be, because you can rule out more accidental or you know, commonplace users. But I would say that the trend that I've seen commercially is that developers as well as fast-growing businesses want freedom. Very large enterprises are so complex that often the administrators and the teams cannot be 100% certain what are all the things that are connecting, either from legacy or current. And so you have these combination of factors with the proliferation of third parties, with the proliferation of like APIs and service dependencies, that makes that a very difficult nut to crack. Not impossible, but difficult. In the context of personal computers and corp, and I think in this context, in that situation, you're going to see more of like the Windows environment as well. You can sometimes have a more streamlined path of knowing who are all the users and applications that would be logging into a certain system and using them, so you have a better chance of it there. And I would say that in instances where you are attempting to attribute actions and files on a local desktop, you are usually you're usually trying to confirm or invalidate a set of suspicions that you already have, you know, by the time you're going on to individuals' computers. One machine may have multiple accounts, obviously. Those accounts may have multiple users. Those accounts may be leveraged by different applications. Those accounts may have federated and tokenized access via other mechanisms like Okta, StrongDM, service accounts, Jira, and knowing, you know, how well managed those accounts are is critical to knowing whether or not you will get anything definite from this process. A big part of what both IT and information security teams need to do on a regular, ongoing sort of gardening basis is making sure that teams are adhering to their own policies and following the best practices. There's almost always a way to set up systems such that all the actions are done by authenticated users, known users, but it's often easier for teams to find workarounds to those things, to share accounts or use easy or no passwords, and that of course breaks apart the whole model. And often, depending on how critical the enterprise is, or the or how sensitized the leadership is, you know, I will pose it back to them as a choice. You know, you can have this level of freedom and looseness, but do not expect to be able to pin down with sureness what happened if something gets hacked. If that is something that we care about, or the regulators care about, or our customers will care about, then we have to get serious. So just letting people know that that's what their set of choices are, and making them really draw through in their head also that forensics isn't necessarily magic. It looks like magic to people who don't know the details, but at the end of the day, it's just detective work on the information that's there. And if the information that's there isn't well instrumented or funded, or people aren't really taking care of it, like they're being sloppy with it, garbage in, garbage out, right? And like getting people to walk that path and understand that is also a critical part of an engineer's job. Let's see, Windows XP starts with administrator and guest accounts. Administrator, of course, being the elevated super user, and guest being the regular user account. Both are disabled by default in Windows 7 and Windows 10. I would encourage those of you administering these systems to know, like the back of your hand, what the default settings are for disabled accounts that use different authentication mechanisms, what's using two-factor, and how those passwords are managed. Don't rely on assumptions about what might be disabled. It's not uncommon after different administrators have been in a system for those defaults to change, or for people to have different settings. So, you know, make it your mission to understand, regardless of the version, what are the default settings for the users and the passwords, who's managing it, and how often those things are rotated and updated. It is sometimes, you can sometimes dig up some very interesting and shocking information when you start asking these questions in an organization, but it's all part of just knowing your baseline risk profile. The SID, the security identifier. So this particular identifier in Windows is very critical, because a lot of the security policies and actions are going to be done under this identifier. And in the world of systems administration, your SID in Windows, or your UID, is critical in knowing what account is actually touching or handling things. Sometimes names for things can be changed, but if you have the SID or the UID, then that can help, that can give you some sureness on that. We just walked through this a little bit. Let me expand this a little bit. Oops. How is the view on this? The font here looks very small to me. How are you all able to, like, is it legible enough?
Works for me.
Okay, great. So you can see here that we've got a username like with a particular SID, and also this gives an explanation of the different groups that they're in and the attributes, the SID number of those different group names, as well as the privileges at the bottom of what things are conferred, right? And so this particular user is enabled for the second element in the privilege here, where they're able to, let's see, it says the change notify privilege. But the other elevated privileges like shutting down or undocking or increasing process working sets or changing time zones are disabled. So they're allowed, this particular one is relatively restricted. And that is also part of what you would be doing in analyzing which users on your system have elevated privileges to do things and which don't. So let me just pull it. Yes, I can leave. Amin just asked me if I can add a link to the slide deck presentation. And this is part of the Merit course file, so you should be able to access it. Let me know if you can't. And I've included that here in the chat, the meeting chat. And then at the Q&A. Okay, so Mo is asking, what does the SID actually represent? Is it ID of the event or the session? So in this case, the SID is actually it applies to the users and the groups. You can see that there is a security identifier on this particular user, which is a student, as well as different security identifiers on different groups. So that's what that applies to. There's being new to forensics. One is natural that one collects. Is it natural? Andrew Pang is asking, is it natural that one collects all digital evidence at the crime scene? Is there such things as collected too much? That will be thrown out since the warrant is not yet presented. I will go into a little bit more detail of chain of custody. You have to understand that, like, as a computer professional, most of us don't have, don't have easy access to police warrants, and that's also like a further degree of like evidence that is that's way down the line. But what you can do in order to keep evidence in the most usable state is that the moment that you believe that a system is going to need deeper investigation and is relevant for a potential crime or incident, or even just good practice in like terms of internal forensics, you want to disconnect it from the general network, keep it on its own quarantine network so that there can't be unauthorized and random access in and out. Sometimes this will require some graceful detachment from services. And the second thing that you need to do is to image it immediately. So, and so what I do when I know that there is going to be a situation that's going to be elevated in terms of the scrutiny that we need to give it, is I will have the team detach it from the network, image the copy immediately and fingerprint that, meaning to get the digital hash of what that image is and timestamp it. And we usually log that in tickets right away to say like, okay, we noticed such and such thing happened, or that we believe that this is going to become relevant later. So we have taken it off the network, out of general use. And as of today, this is the fingerprinted hash of this image, so that if it should come up later, investigators will know that we had an intact copy as of this time, and any investigations on that copy are correct. And then we will make copies of that image for people to do their investigation. We would make every effort and to just lock away the original and keep that as evidence. Now, all of this can be a little bit time consuming and a little bit expensive. So you have to sometimes make a judgment call on whether or not, hey, I think this is actually going to become an elevated situation, or I just think that like someone on the team made a mistake. I'm going to take a quick look, so. But if for any reason you think that it's going to require like an internal or external investigation for threat or for bad actions, then I that's when you want to start treating it as an artifact of evidence and keeping it safe and locked away, and then distributing copies for people to do their investigation on. So in that case, with the magic of ghosting and copying things, we have the benefit of a lot of great tools to immediately capture lots of information. So Andrew, I would not worry too much about collecting too much information unless this is like a major cost issue or like a storage issue. And there's usually ways around. There's usually options for that you can investigate. But I think what you want to do is to make sure that things are kept very clean and precise. And then as the team works through things, you will be selective. They will be selective about what threads and investigation trails to go after. Because very, very complex situations are going to be a combination of trade-offs and how many people you have to chase down something or how much funding you have to hire an outside firm to come in and do it. And usually by the time you're hiring an outside firm, it's very, very expensive. And so and again, you want to be targeted and specific. It's like, they basically cost as much as lawyers, right? So at that point, you're being very specific about what you want them to chase down. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So CIS security IDs in the registry. In Windows administration world, registry is very important. A lot of the key configurations as well as that sort of records of things can be found in the registry. And so you want to be aware of, all of these that they're indicating here, the H key in terms of users, machines, current users are relevant. And so I would kind of take a mental snapshot of that in your mind of, what's critical. And some of this also might be the latest versions of Windows might have updated versions of it. But the key is that there's going to be registration keys related to users, groups, entities, and logs that are very important to track and understand, like changes in state, deletions, replacements, and things like that. In any forensics investigation, I have my team set up a timeline very early on and start that in a ticketing system as well to say, like, okay, let's start mapping out the timeline and of events and updating it as you go. And so when you notice that keys were deleted at this time, systems here were altered at this time, systems started going down or showing performance fluids at this time, you can start mapping out the picture of what might have happened. So here's a few more well-known SIDs, and I think also critical for understanding window administration. Local systems and service accounts, authority and administrator accounts. All of these, especially the administrator account, is very critical for knowing the overall. Usually, when there are hacked or security events happening, it will often involve a hijacking of an account somewhere and an elevation of privilege to administrator or in Unix world root, which would allow any set of actions to occur. Any set of shutdowns on applications, any set of changes in files, and you have to keep a very close eye to know whether or not that got altered. Once I see that a root account system or an administrator account system was altered, I assume that machine is compromised and that there were bad actors on there, and they may have also started pivoting on the system. So as soon as you observe that an administrator account has been compromised or changed without explanation, that machine needs to come off of the network immediately. And anyone working on it has to approach it with a very, very careful approach. Don't connect any of their own trusted devices to the same network as that device, because an attacker who has either has good experience in leveraging and pivoting within internal systems, or who has been observing your organization for a long time, can install scripts and programs that can compromise other hosts and networks within seconds, or probably even less at this point. And so you cannot make any assumption at all that time is on your side if you have noticed that root accounts have been compromised, administrator accounts have been compromised. And just taking a quick look at the Q&A. Okay. Are there, okay, all right, I think we answered all this. External drives, this is also very important. So in Windows administration, USB store will show you which devices have been attached to a computer. And this is helpful in knowing if someone attached another drive with applications or scripts on it that might have come onto, almost certainly came onto the computer or like were executed on files. There's analogs for these files in Linux world as well. You might look at things that were altered in the log for device drivers or on the swap or the file system. And so different kinds of things, places where the system regularly catalogs when new hardware has been added or has been mounted or detached from the system are critical to know, because you want to know if someone managed to connect another system that has artifacts and programs on it that you may or may not have visibility into at that moment. And all that helps to paint the picture of what you can confirm and what you can't confirm. Recycle bin. So, of course, important to see what files might have been deleted, either in the course of applications that are running and have, garbage to change over or recycle, and or evidence files that people might have wanted to delete. A very common one is to try to remove histories of what happened. Like, I think like something like that USB store would be a really good target for someone to try to either alter or zero out. Swap files that show what might have happened in memory. Administrator and user logs that show different user accounts that were logged into or got created or deleted on the system, all those things. So anything that shows, especially that administration of meta information, higher level information, is what you want to keep on your list to flag. Recycle bin operation, not everything deleted goes into the recycle bin. There is a way to bypass recycle bin by shift delete. So in that case, you can also strengthen the security control in the system by, by making sure that the recycle bin is used on a regular basis. But as noted, a user can disable the recycle bin properties for specific users, and if they have administrator level privileges, could do it for everybody. So what you want to do is treat the alteration of evidence or evidence of changes in logging as just as important as actual evidence of something bad that happened. And from what I understand in legal context, destruction of evidence is treated as just as serious a level as crime itself. So nuke on delete the registry key in WinXP and Win7. This particular registry key would get rid of information without moving it into the recycle bin. And I think that this is something that you would want to check for existence on different applications as they have here, and see whether or not there are applications that are also going to bypass the normal logging and audit trail. So metadata that we hear about, and this is true for any kind of computer system that you're on. File system metadata such as the timestamps are really important here, and being able to access what those timestamps are. Files that the created time, I think it's a CMAC, created, modified, accessed, and changed. The access time will tell you when something has been viewed or touched. And then changes will usually indicate if content inside the file were changed. Modified might also say that files have been moved, soft links might have been changed, or permissions around the file might have been changed. And all of that is very critical also for seeing were they opening up access to another user or another application to start doing other things. And you might see this like in a chained exploit where there's an elevation of privilege, change certain files to allow usage by other systems that are more easily accessible. Let's see. Can metadata be altered? The existence of metadata can be altered. For instance, in Unix world, like there's a setting in the file system tab, like called A-time, and that can be changed to say, don't log the access time. People will often do this to get a performance gain because it's less information that the system has to log. But those things can be altered at like a root or early level. In terms of whether or not the metadata can be, if I become an administrator or a root user, can I change other metadata on that particular file? In most cases, not arbitrarily, unless you're going into some deep level of file or metadata changing, like going into and knowing where to do that. So I think that like the key for that is knowing what level of user got compromised on the system, whether or not the administrator or root users got changed. In that case, usually most of the artifacts on the system are suspect because different things can be manipulated. The application metadata, things like author's name, the GPS coordinates, the software owner's name, what machine, what's the name of the machine it's on, other kinds of origin information that shows up in the application. All of these things are also critical to see if there's something unusual, right? Like if you're seeing things that are either not trusted vendors or not your developer team that show different fingerprints of like, hey, this is like an unusual user, or this is like an unusual host name or time, or geography of when something got moved on to here. Those are all things that should set off that red flag as well. So different timestamps on Windows systems, right? So here is the CMA information. Like when you open up the properties file on here, there's a very key point here that this all depends on the system clock also, which can be reset. And if the system clock is reset, then the files are going to log their time as that current new time that's been reset. So I think that like part of what makes this kind of information useful is knowing also the norms of what different files are accessed and for what reasons. Sometimes files might be read by different applications for benign purposeful reasons, and it's not a red flag in itself. But if your administrators have a good sense on what the norms are in terms of what files and applications should be used, that will go a long way in also knowing like, hey, this was an unusual access or this was not an unusual access. So Sleuthkit is a tool set that can be used and like will help us show different, will help show the MAC times. And here, here we have they've used the word V for birth or the creation of the file, so it doesn't conflict with the C of the changed file. The contents have been changed. And what just keep in mind that these are some of the core things that are there, and like what usually what you'll be looking at is like the accessed and modified the modified components, sometimes the changed components, like if scripts or applications are being added or loaded into places that they shouldn't be. So timestamp principles. Again, there's that good emphasis on just knowing that the integrity of your machine is there, right? So if the system clock has changed, then you know that the integrity of the information that's there isn't sound anymore and like can indicate different things. Using multiple tools, I think it gets back to like if you're using different forensics tools, making sure that you can confirm things with multiple sources, or that your timeline is adding up in terms of the overall picture. A lot of times you're going to choose where to double click on this or not. You don't normally have the time to question or challenge every single timestamp on every file that you're looking at. But if you're seeing that there are certain things that are suspect, that's when you're going to go a little bit deeper and say like, okay, can I trust what I'm seeing here? Sorry. So EXIF is a way to get into deeper metadata in an in a file, right? So here's an example of a photo of John McAfee, who of course is the founder of McAfee Software. And if you're looking into deeper information about the image, you can use something like the EXIF viewer to see what kind of see some of the attribution and metadata on it, but also to dig in a little bit further. Let's see here, like there's a lot of pretty detailed timestamp information here, as well as different information about how the picture itself was captured and that kind of thing. So here we're talking, there is an important thing to know about hidden information inside documents. And this is something that documents as well as images. And this gets back to things that are hidden in binary files, right? We call that steganography. And part of what the tools should give you an insight into is whether or not something might have been embedded into a file or a document. So like if you have a compromised machine and you're trying to expand or take a deeper look on what it might be inside of that those files, you have to make an assumption that a lot of the files on there may have been tampered with. There might be stuff that the attacker was waiting for you to run, to open an image, to run an application in order to run a malicious payload inside of that file. And so this is where things like timestamps and integrity checks, meaning like fingerprinted hashes of the actual file itself become important to know, like, hey, this is a sound file, not a sound meaning a good file, versus something that's been tampered with. So on compromised machines or compromised files, we treat that as something that needs to be handled in a special work zone. So different ways of removing metadata. There's a Microsoft Office document inspector where you can look through it to look deeper at the metadata in a file. Things like the comments and the revisions and the annotations that go around a file, hidden text, as well as customized XML data. There might sometimes be other personal information that's saved within the document, but not apparent in the content explicitly. And that kind of thing becomes important in being able to dig into that a little bit further. Amin asked a question 14 minutes ago. Did you say change or chain to exploit? I think the two expressions. So when we were talking about macro, that would have been changes. Let's see, modifications, mods, accesses, changes, birth of file, or chain of custody for handling forensic artifacts. Does that answer the question, Amin? So thumbnail caches. So There's of course a cache that's kept to, thanks, Amin. There's of course a cache that's kept to optimize speed on showing thumbnails and pictures of things. Caches are great places also to hide artifacts and things like that, because they tend to have a lot of information that's coming in and out and not necessarily inspected all the time. And so things like caches, swap files, temp files, things that are supposed to be innocuous but involve lots of change and lots of kind of disposal or garbage collection. In some ways, you can use some analogies with the physical world on this, right? Like where, you know, things that like where people try to dispose of things or move through things really quickly are good places to dig in a little bit and look for things that are unusual, right? Even files that have like very blank or vague names, executables, things that have permissions or users that look unusual, right? Like root user or some user you've never seen before. Those are all things that should be flagging like, hey, this merits deeper inspection. Windows XP thumbnails. There's a database file for that called thumbs.db. And hidden files are also a really important thing to be able to dig into when doing forensics on Windows. In all of the folders, there is a property that say list hidden files or don't list hidden files. When you're doing forensics, I would definitely recommend listing them because you're looking for the unusual. And a smart attacker would probably try to have put it in a place that could evade detection. Windows 7 thumbnails files, like these DB files, and that might be in places that are kept for pictures, but also kept, I believe, for folder or desktop images. Would be critical for finding like small files that are being maintained there. Also places where information or payloads could be embedded inside a file because those database files aren't regularly parsed or opened up by people. So those are things that you'd want to look for, things like, hey, was this cache or thumbnail file changed at a weird time? Was something added that shouldn't have been? And those thumbnails are regularly retrieved and run because they're being used for, you know, quick performant view of images. So that would be a good place to hide, you know, hide something that you want a user to run inadvertently. Most recently used files. So right-click taskbar button in Windows 7. Windows 10 will probably have a slightly different flow. The main point is that when you are on systems, you want to see who was on there and what they were most recently doing. So the most recently used files in Windows, in Unix world, that'll be things like your histories and login files, and the ones that are saved for root users as well as individual users. Those are usually also in the hidden files in those accounts under the dot extension files. Forward here. System restore. So system restore functions are important both for detecting unusual behavior and also for your own forensics restoral to service. So as mentioned, like when you have something that might have been compromised, make sure to get a locked intact copy that's not going to be tampered with, put away. Have copies and restore functions for images ready to go. But you also want to see if someone was doing odd timed copies and restoral, possibly covering tracks, right? And again, even if you can't catch the actual malicious commands that were run, if you can catch destruction of evidence, that will usually be something that's critical to show as well. Restore points. Windows 7 creates a restore point every 7 days by default. XP and Vista did it every day. As a system administrator, also be cognizant of when the schedule is for things to be backed up and restored. And that helps both from a reliability as well as a forensics point of view. And these are created by a shadow copy service, which can copy files even when they are in use. A shadow copy service is also a really ideal thing to be leveraged by an attacker in terms of being able to copy move away files like without being obvious in that while on the system. So I think look to observe like where files got moved on and off and unexpectedly, and different users access things so that they shouldn't have. When restore points are created, an application is installed with a compatible Vista or Win7 installer. Restore point is made when system restore is performed, and it's made first so that the system restore can be reversed as part of the backup process. The restore settings are something to know, like what is possible from that perspective of both backing up as well as knowing what an attacker might be able to retrieve later, and be aware of like what level of comprehensiveness your system restore function is going to do. In this case, it says that there's 3 options in this particular version of Windows where you can restore the system settings in the previous versions of files, or it will only restore the previous versions of files, but not your system settings and configs. And in that case, you will want to have a record or a backup of what those configurations and settings were in case you need to, or you need to compare changes that happened. Or turning off the system protection. Turning off the system protection, of course, would say that any kind of automatic recording of these things is not happening, and I would say is not really being managed for full availability. If it goes down, it goes down. System restore files is in the C drive system volume information. It's only intended for system access. It's not intended for regular users to take ownership of it. Be wary of like what the administrator might be able to do in this particular case in terms of moving things around, or if something achieved system administrator privilege. Make the slide just a little bit smaller. So here, there are previous versions of backups that are showed here with the restore point. I want to caution, like if you are relying on, if you create a backup strategy for some critical systems, make sure to have a strategy around cold and warm and hot backups, right? And even if that means that, hey, a hot backup meaning something that you can restore immediately, a warm backup meaning something that's online and networked somewhere, but maybe requires a little bit of administration to restore, maybe something that's backed up on storage or in an S3 cloud somewhere. And then, of course, cold storage, where you have like copies that are brought offline on some regular basis, either for restore points or for forensics, and some kind of system. The strategy that you have will always tie to both the criticality of the data, the criticality of your availability, like, how well do you have to capture day-to-day changes, and also your budget, right? Budget in terms of time and resources. We can't afford to copy everything all the time because it's just not feasible. Even Google has like deletion schedules for certain things that aren't used, right? But what you want with a strategy is to have that conversation with your team and your higher ups in terms of like what level of loss or theft people are willing to tolerate if there's not a backup that's immediately available from like a week ago. Can we tolerate a backup from a month ago, or do you need to have it online all the time? And what do you do to protect those backups in the event of a compromise? If I know that this particular system has been compromised and I am only confident up to the that local network, I'm only confident on things outside of that network. I believe that entire local network has been compromised. Any backups on that system are also potentially compromised, depending on like what the evidence is showing. And so you want to have a intentional strategy about what that means and like how you know, how often people are copying things and how much people are paying for it. Prefetch. So prefetch is an option that you can use to make a Windows machine run faster to optimize performance. And that's a shortcut to programs that you commonly open. The prefetch viewer helps read files, and this might also be a good location to see if someone was looking at or working with files most recently. So a little bit like a history log as well of like, hey, this is what the user that was most recently on this particular host was looking at. And that's also relevant for your investigation. You will see that a lot of the practices and the tools that are used for performance optimization, as well as for backups and recovery, are also relevant for forensics, because the same thing you would use to bring things back to normal service are the same things you would use to discover whether something was off. And this is an image of like the prefetch directory in WinXP. I'm going to move a little bit quickly now so that we can get to the Unix part. Because I'm only with you until 11 today, so my apologies. Prefetch in Win 7, you can also dig around this in like your own work in your labs. Link files, shortcuts to programs and other files. They have times and date stamps. Links in the recent files folder to network shares may even contain the MAC address of the server, meaning the hardware address. Hardware address of something is probably like a more accurate link than something that's referring to a host name or domain name, which can be changed logically. Link files are also helpful during the forensics process to see what might have been created in the course of someone doing some unsanctioned work, right? So they might have created shortcuts to certain things, or applications or scripts that they might have created shortcuts and temporary files to different things. And all those things give you breadcrumbs to like what might have happened on the system. Recent files view by NERSOFT. NERSOFT is another application tool to see you know, what files were most recently used. This is WinXP, Vista, Win 7, Win 10. And then you know, depending on your version, you see what works. Installed programs give information about the user's activities, as mentioned. Recently uninstalled programs, important evidence also. Traces of uninstalled programs, as mentioned, are programs files, links, prefetch files. You know, so here we go. Okay, so that is the full content of this part of the Windows file system part. I'm gonna give us just maybe a couple minutes to answer your questions and get a just a little bit of a mental breath, and then move to some of the stuff on Unix and general methodology and forensics. Any questions or requests? Oh, let's see some in the chat. Great question. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say there is few questions in the chat as well as the Q&A. So whichever.
Right, I will check both. Let's see, who still uses Windows 7? This is common. Great question. So all the things that are kind of version specific, make sure to extrapolate like, hey, what's actually relevant in this system or, you know, this version. I think we can probably clean up the content a little bit, but let's see if I want, go ahead.
I'll probably add a comment. Actually, that's, you know, your water cleaning facilities use Windows 7. So
good to know. Water cleaning.
So, you know, there was a recent attack on one of the water purification facilities in Florida, and that was because they had an old like Windows 7 running. And so there is a number of, you know, government utility companies, if you will. They have like some industrial control system program, which was written for that version of the operating system. And they since then, no one was maintaining it. So they have one machine which just runs that.
Yes.
So, there are scenarios where this is applicable. So, fortunately, actually, more so unfortunately, there are a lot of high risk scenarios in which older
Right.
windows are still running.
Yeah, you're gonna see, like, depending on where you go in your career, you'll see like a different set of different fleets, right? So to Vaibhav's point, a lot of the more change resistant organizations are ones that value stability and predictability much, or they perceive stability and predictability and staying with the old systems. That creates its own legacy debt issues. And so if you are with older industrial tech, right? Sometimes big banks, big institutions also will have lots of layered legacy legacy footprints. And so a really big part of this is if you're not the expert on the system, finding the people in the company who are, as well as having backstop strategies for make an assumption that on very old legacy complex tools, it's really hard to get precise results unless like the experts there all the time. So you want to have backup strategies such as like, what's our last known clean backup? What's our network segmentation or ability to contain a problem? Assuming that sometimes you might need to do like wipes and replaces and things like that. Yes, COBOL. Yeah, there's a lot of banks that I'm sure are still using it. I think my mom trained on that back in the 1980s, and it's still out there. So, old retail shops, companies that are like 70 years old, will certainly have like, some mainframe footprints in there. Amin asked, if I want to do forensics after I finish CIS infrastructure, what are next steps career-wise? What I would suggest, aside from just all the normal things about, playing with, the machines and labs that you have, is there are some good targeted courses with Kali Linux, I believe. Here, I'll write down. Kali Linux person. It's a SANS, of course, Institute, SANS Institute. And I think that if you are, I would actually recommend finding good forensics firms that are out there, or consulting firms, and seeing if you could intern with them. Because forensics is usually high criticality, really expensive situations. Companies are not going to usually only pull in outside firms when they're in a crisis mode. But in those firms, you might get to see a lot very quickly, and like those more acute situations. So I think that would be, that's what I would do at this stage, And then you might, luckily or unluckily, end up encountering situations in your own line of work, and those will always be trial by fire, but it's all valuable at the end of the day. I'm going to switch gears quickly to the Unix side of it. So let me grab my screen. So again, the principles and the ideas you can extrapolate to any system. Like, you're going to assume sometimes you're going to walk into networks and systems that have exotic or unusual flavors of systems, and like, okay, so what is it that I want to draw from what I did before, right? I need to know where the hidden files are. I need to know what the identity and authentication scheme is. I need to know what the backups routine and strategy is. I need to understand our network segmentation so that like we can quarantine things quickly. So like always get back to your basics, and like chain of custody and stuff. And then, and then the tools will change and get tweaked over time, right? So when I'm going to telescope out for a moment and just kind of talk about forensics methodology that helps drive some of like my file system work when I'm doing this. I try to think a little bit like a journalist or an investigator when we run into a situation like this. Can I get into the who, what, where, when, and why, and then eventually the how? And those are the bits of information and metadata I'm looking for in the process. you know, being able to quickly identify like what's the core systems or core motivations that really matter here. Let's say I'm in a 60-person company and we have some major concerns around 2 particular systems or situations. I'm going to make sure that like we have justified, you know, visibility and logging in those right things. You also will sometimes need to consult with your ethics and legal people in the company in terms of what is legal, in terms of you don't want to create surveillance culture generally. You don't necessarily want to create the cost and the false leads that may sometimes come if it's too heavy-handed an approach. But there is absolutely a time and place to say like, hey, we have our version of probable cause. We have reason to believe XYZ is a problem. Here's why. What do we need to document? What do we need to talk? Who do we need to talk to legally to make sure we're covered? And then can I have my team do XYZ? You know, so in those cases, make sure that you have, if you have a situation that's going to eventually get very expensive and end up possibly in the hands of forensic investigators or a court, make sure that you have stakeholder support across your organization. These things can get very sensitive, both with the personnel as well as fears of exposure and like what other people might think. So that's the kind of thing where at different thresholds of criticality, you have to know who to bring it up to, who has wisdom, who has juice in the organization, who knows when to punt it to an outside expert. Impacts. So things that are really critical from a forensic standpoint. I said like there's 3 major things that we really care about, right? Money in terms of direct economic impact, business uptime, time and hassle expense. I would even also say intellectual property. So get a real-time update on that. Privacy, personal information, and PII, those kinds of personally identifiable information, especially things that are above and beyond phone book, things like birth year, social security numbers, health information, sensitive financials, whether personal or corporate. All of those things have much greater penalties, like on privacy laws. And in California, actually, the threshold for disclosure is actually pretty low. I think that if I recall, and double check my work, if there are more than 500 accounts, user accounts that are compromised, I believe the company is supposed to file a statement with the Secretary of State. And 500 is not that many. So, you know, things like that start to get really sensitive. And sometimes if you have a targeted situation, either internally or someone targets your company and wants to intimidate people, or you've got a competitive corporate espionage situation happening, you know, specific people, specific patterns of life or information can be, as I say, weaponized in different ways. And so those are things that are also sensitive information. We try to look also at sensitive credentials, all the things in security world that we're really worried about: tokens, passwords, authentication certs, special keys, special sensitive configurations that might, you know, be a hint to an attacker where to go. You know, network maps, you know, that's actually, you know, also I would call sensitive or IP. So those are things that when you are challenged with a situation like this, you have to focus on what's important first. And so those are the things one would start, you know, having the team work through what are our threats around these particular issues. As companies grow in size and complexity, it is impossible to track and deal with everything. So it's really important to prioritize and triage. Let's see, let me move to the next slide. Chain of custody. Okay, so this is my, here, and I'll include a link here to the chat. So this is sort of my order of operations for when there is something that needs to happen. There, if you look online, I think that there'll probably be a lot of different documents and lists. This is also like sort of my mental checklist when something occurs. Essential, of course, protect the original. You know, don't let that get tampered with. Don't let that get mishandled or destroyed. You know, that's critical both for your own peace of mind and how something's being handled, as well as potential use in legal or criminal proceedings, right? So you also want to be able to capture as much live state data as possible, right? So like when you start moving things off the network, when you start shutting down machines, you also run the danger of like certain things being purged, right? Like recycle bins being deleted or emptied, swap files, temp files being removed, a network state of what's happening can sometimes get changed. So when we know something's being compromised or there's an attacker in there, look for ways to contain the network as quickly as possible, do dumps of network state and network connections, what's connecting to and from this machine right this second, and then cut it down. So there's a delicate balance there. I have had teams and situations work closely with threat actors in very, very surgically precise ways to try to draw more information out. You know, and you have to be very, very careful in those situations, but from a legal standpoint, as well as making sure that that investigation is not jeopardizing your current assets. So that's there's a bit of a dance there. Things that matter, right? Digital stuff, memory, network, hidden files, physical items, positions, fingerprints, access points and records, who's logging into the data center, who's walking in, video, who's shoulder surfing, someone tailgating into a building, you know, things like that. And then monitor and have your backups wherever you need. I will usually, like, even if I know everything's on a schedule and is being maintained, go and double check everything if something is starting to get critical. Like go and double check with your administrator, like, okay, did we really make sure we got those backups? Do we know that they're safe? Please keep an eye on them, you know, just to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks when people get busy. Because sometimes, especially if information has not been freely, usually information on internal threats and compromises is kept close to the vest. And a lot of times, like the entire team or like some of the people actually handling the artifacts may not be aware of the full context. So always make sure to have, take the time to communicate. Be precise and appropriate, but take the time to make sure that that loop is closed. Imaging and checksumming the original, gracefully cycling down the original, all of this going nicely into a ticket log that is private and secure where you need to. Integrity checksum so that you can check along the way what changed and what might not have, and then audit trails. Key Unix logs and files. This is my list of things that I think are really critical. The off log, SU log, the key directories inside etc and var log, D messages, systemd, the settings in the FS tab and VFS tab, the things that might change the recording of things like access times or those metadata on those files. As much of the stuff that's going into your security incident and event management, the SIM system, if there is one. And if not, like what's going to centralized logging and making sure that gets preserved, making sure things don't get accidentally deleted or rotated off because of space constraints. So. Okay, so this was an example. My apologies, Bob. I usually spend about 3 hours with the class with like breaks in between. So like it's a lot of content to pack in. But you know, for those of you who have time, I would say take the time to go look at like some really interesting breaches that are out there. Target is a classic one back from 2000. It was 13, and that was a really interesting one. It was a chained series of events with, like, I think it was an HVAC vendor who had a password and then pivoted into the systems and got to the point of sale systems eventually. And their leadership ended up testifying in front of Congress and all of that. Other kill chains to check out. I think it was Equifax, and then also recently SolarWinds is a really good one too, because that when that's a supply chain attack that came in, and SolarWinds is a software supply deployment system that many companies and three-letter agencies use, and certain parts got exploited, and attackers were able to sit and wait for, I think it was 9 months or so in certain institutions, and observe how to get in, where to get in, and like observe weaknesses and patterns and stuff. And so, you know, really observe like what is the chain of events that happen when a real life attack happens. You're going to see they're very multifaceted. They leverage multiple weaknesses and opportunity. And what are those things that the people would have wished that they had had in being able to either prevent or to detect what was going quickly? If we set the expectation that you will get attacked at some point, especially if your business has any kind of profile, what do you do to make those attacks shallow? If someone comes in, they're not getting anything really important up front. And what do you do to make those attacks loud so that it is not something that invisibly goes into our system of monitoring? And I think the SolarWinds is also illustrative of the fact that like monitoring in itself does not solve the problem, because many teams are overwhelmed with how much signal and monitoring is coming in. So the sorting and the knowing what to collect and look at and what not to becomes really critical. There was a, I think it was FireEye, but I might be misquoting, but I think it was FireEye that caught it on their systems. But in the thousands of alerts that like come in every day, and like which overburdened SOC analyst happened to miss it that day, you know, and the signal from the noise, you know. So kind of looking at like what were the key breaks in the chain, and like what happens at scale, what happens in places that are expect things to break, expect things to be imperfect, that people aren't going to catch every alert. How do you make something loud and shallow and recoverable, you know? And that's where I tried to have the teams focus in terms of the defensive exercise as well, like looking through from the perspective of an attack, from the perspective of an offensive attack that succeeded, you know, and then what logs would you have needed to keep and where.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, feel free to go over. It's if you have time, I just also wanted to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I have some buffer today, so if we go a little bit past 11, I'll probably want a couple minute break in a moment, but we'll just I'll go through this, and like we can discuss a little bit. Maybe I think that's what we'll do today. I'll go through these slides. There's not a ton. I only have about 11 or 12. Let people take a moment and then kind of come back and just have discussion. So yeah, lateral movement kill chains, really important too, right? Like in the flood of information, the flood of alerts and systems, you know, things that are perceived as low risk can become critical when they're chained with other problems, right? So if we trace this, and I think Target's an example of this, SolarWinds is also an example of this. External recon, so the threat actors doing research outside, they compromise a machine, maybe through a vendor, 1 weak password, maybe some peripheral system. They start getting a foothold where they can observe, and they get a little more internal recon on how behaviors in the organization happen, users and developers. And this is where often you will hear people say, oh yeah, we have a hard shell soft center. Doesn't really stand up as a good security strategy. You have to look at it defense in depth, going to the weakest link in the chain and finding all those places where you can contain problems. You cannot assume like one layer of the shell will protect the whole. So at this point, they're inside. They can start observing developers, users' behaviors, like who's logging in where, what kind of users are using, where they're sloppy. They can do a local privilege escalation. A lot of machines allow you to do local escalation, even if you don't have the major root passwords. Start compromising credentials. They could perhaps sit around and wait and watch other people logging in that might either be using credentials at higher level systems or moving credentials and keys around. Administrator level recon. So now they're at a higher level. They're not just looking as a regular user. As an administrator, I can now install things and run things. I can run code locally. I might be able to capture things and do packet dumps or exfiltrate data that's coming in and out. domain admin creds or something like root creds. You know, okay, now I'm at the next level, right? Domain dominance. I now own this system or own this network. I can do whatever I want here. I can run whatever code I want. Asset recon. Like now I know I can see all the assets that are in the system. What hosts, what networks, what data are there. Now let's go up a level again. And then now we have the asset access. You can see where this goes. It builds up over time. And if someone or network is really focused, they can take that time to sit 9 months, a year, longer, if they haven't been detected, and then start moving things around. So all those little signals, the spidey sense that you and your team have, you must be attentive to it. You cannot dive deep on every single one, but you have to listen when people say like, yeah, hey, like, I don't know why this volume of network data is going up all the time. Are people just listening to music at that time of day? Or like, what kind of data is going out, you know? Why is this particular user keep needing to reset their credentials? Are they sloppy or is there something else going on? You know, it's, you know, kind of figuring out that picture becomes really important. I feel that one of the ironies of working in security is that many of us come in and maybe are a little bit more introverted and like to work with the technology, but the truth is you must listen to everybody in your organization because they will sometimes give you the clue that you need to know or the help. Videos and podcasts, a bunch of links that I think are really interesting for those of us in our domain and really real life examples of critical stuff that happened over the last 5 to 7 years, 10 years, right? SolarWinds podcast, and there's a lot of analysis and kill breaches about those chains. A lot of different opinions on what needs to happen or what went wrong, you know. The Yahoo and Verizon data breach, I think, is also very illustrative. You can see like a clear financial impact to the valuation of that company when they had that breach. And there's multiple things that like were handled, I think, in not an ideal way. Like they didn't get on top of it. They didn't communicate clearly with the public. It dripped out gradually over time, getting worse and worse, eroding the trust in the company. I notice when companies and executives handle breaches and compromises in a good way, when they are blunt and straightforward and concise with what it was, with what the damage was, and what they're going to do about it, and they follow up on it, you know, and that builds trust. So I think that's the thing is like, you know, these horrible, big and complex threats are out there and they happen all the time. How do companies and people recover from that? How do you handle it in a good way and in a constructive way is just as important as being able to defend. You know, Zuckerberg and Facebook at Congress, like, I think a lot of that is, in my opinion, still playing out in terms of what is the impact of supposedly, you know, people that might have been let in through the front door in terms of like creating accounts and having things and then using or abusing the systems in unknown ways. There's a classic called The Cuckoo's Egg that also kind of brings in an interesting, very complex chain of events from something that seems to be very innocuous, like a small difference in an accounting error that gets chased down. So there's a lot of like different interesting things on, you know, from the real life example. Getting into a little bit more the nitty gritty of some links here in terms of different tools, right? And, you know, there's things that there's a good network forensics toolkit with SIFT and Kali Linux. I have a video here for that. You can take a look. There's also a bunch of different tools here. The EXIF tool, Autopsy, which is great for you know, doing full forensics, as well as different things to take a look at. PowerShell. If you're a Windows user, get very good at PowerShell and how to use that for both investigative and scripting purposes. And of course, like some of the blogs that are really good to follow on security, Breach-Schneider on security, Krebs on security, especially when there is big public events happening. There's a lot of really good current stuff. And that is all of the extra materials that I have there. It went a little bit fast, but hopefully you guys can, all of you can take a look when you want to. I would like to suggest maybe a 5-minute bio break, and then I'll come back and answer any questions, and we can just or have a discussion with the class if you wish.
That would be perfect.
Excellent.
That would be perfect.
Okay.
Let's
come
do
back.
let's do a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back.
Sounds good. See you guys soon.
11:08.
Yes. yeah, feel free to log on, and if you're comfortable with it, please please do share your video. So I would say you can you know, as we get started, we can you know, you can type questions into the chat or Q&A, or just speak up or raise your hand. We can have this be a open discussion. I see a note from Craig H here in the Q&A. I'm curious how common attempt attacks are at the places you've worked in your 25 years, about how many attempts been made per year and how many of those have led to catching the perpetrators, right? So I would say that probably in the last, especially when I was working at, so I spent like 3 years at Walmart and e-commerce. And so you can kind of go in with the assumption that people are trying to, you know, hack into it all the time. Sometimes, you know, for specific financial criminal reasons, and sometimes just for fun. And so, you know, I would say like in the really high profile places, and Roblox is in that category as well, because the user base, you get a lot of really concerted and sometimes sophisticated attacks from the kids. And I would imagine that there are thousands of attempts. So we see the most serious ones, you know, and of course, we had managed things to a level that was, you know, we didn't have, we had no major public breaches. I think that's pretty much on record that that was not something that happened during that period. But we also have to be really careful about how we all talk about these things, because like the average amount of time that it takes to discover a problem or to for things to become apparent if you've been compromised silently is actually there's a window, right? So we can only say that like we believe this is the best that we do at the time. Now, who was caught? I would say that in probably the last, let's say the last 15 years that I've been working, when we had anything of serious concern, we usually had identified who was involved in the proportional response. Sometimes sometimes it's something as simple as having a conversation with them. Sometimes it's getting the legal department involved. Sometimes it's working through, you know, working through forensics agencies that we work with that can help with certain kinds of mediation. And so there is I will say that we always do our best, and we had answered the open questions we had. I know that's a little bit vague, but you'll understand at some point that you know, when these things happen, you have to be very, very precise about how you talk about them. Are there any breaches or forensics issues that you all have either been working on or have seen that are of a special interest?
Well, kind of. I currently intern for the state of California, and I have done some work with the city of Oakland, and there have been a number of times that local city governments have been under like attack and things like that. And so, I mean, I assume, I haven't researched all of them, obviously, but the ones that I kind of know about, I assume it's like someone, like a social engineering situation, but like, in terms of, you know, what's happening, what's compromised, like it's kind of all unknown a bit, right?
Right. Yeah. There's always unknown unknowns, as I say, you know, to quote some to quote some people who were in the military, right? But I think that you try, as a security professional generally, you try to get that surface of unknown unknowns as small as possible, as close to zero as possible. And that's one of the things that, one of the fundamentals, like I consistently harp upon, is the need for good visibility and good monitoring, because that's both the thing that helps defend you and also the thing that helps you know whether something happened. Plausible deniability is no longer a a valid thing to hide behind, whether it's like as a security person or a company or anyone that's handling the trust of your customers or the public. So yeah, there's a lot of like very like kind of prescribed protocols around if there's a breach, and this is what qualifies as a breach, and how many people did it impact, and the statements you need to make publicly and to your investors, the regulators, and that kind of thing. Those kinds of things should show up in like SEC reports and whatnot, like in terms of disclosures. So the things that are known about, or the things that are on the table, that couldn't be hidden, are almost always, they're out there. Like, right, you look at like Yahoo, Facebook, all these things, like they came out in due time because it was required, right? You assume as a security person that you're kind of always striving to get to 99.999% confidence, right? Like there's always going to be that little bit that's like, okay, there might be something here that we didn't account for. You have to be humble enough about that to say like, hey, we did a really good job. We did all the things that we needed to do. We have a good team. We attacked and defended every line that we knew. There might have still been something that we didn't think about, And I think that's part of what makes this job and this profession so interesting. It's like, it's creative, right? The attackers are creative, so the defenders also have to be creative. And sometimes people are using things and it's like, it's valid usage of a tool, right? Like one of the companies I worked at, like, we were getting like a lot of really, really high spiked download, like uploads of, music files from Latin America, because I think it became well known by music producers that like it was a good service to use to to distribute their stuff, but certain accounts in terms of service were being abused. And so it's like there's kind of a fine line between like what's valid usage versus things that are abuse of the system, and then from there into like, hey, now this is like clearly a trespass and a breach, and it's stealing data, money, rights, that kind of thing. So yeah, you always have to leave room for the possibility that there was something that was not caught, and still be confident to the executives. Did that answer your question, Raven?
Yeah, it was, I understand it. So is there a, do one of the like associations associated with cybersecurity, are there clear guidelines on how an organization can effectively monitor their network outside of them having some like dedicated team? Does that make sense? Like, because a lot of these, like, I guess, in like smaller cities and stuff, like they don't
Right.
have one.
Teams, right?
Maybe they should.
Yeah.
Where's the
Right.
threshold?
Yeah, they should. And that's the thing. It's a constant push-pull between like sensitizing people to knowing like what they should do before a disaster strikes, and it's tough, especially with a lot of these like governmental systems, critical infrastructure and whatnot. Like they weren't intending to be technology companies or organizations, but the reality to life today is that everybody has to be a technology organization. Exactly. Yeah, it's like it or not, this is who we are and where we are, right? And I would say that there are a lot of benchmarks to use. I would pick a well-known standard that is closest to the compliance requirements of that particular company or org, right? Like as a backstop, like you can always go to NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology Standards. They have I think there's a common security framework that they use. Another really good one is one we use for a lot of compliance benchmarks is the ISO 27001. That's an international standard. And so if I were in an organization like that and just starting to sensitize people to what needed to happen, I would pull out the most important parts, maybe 3 to 5 of the most important parts of those benchmarks in terms of like the network, data privacy and security. It's like, okay, how do we start getting to X? Because that's what responsible management of this is. If we can't do that, can we simplify it and then start outsourcing certain parts? You know, like if the organization doesn't have the people or the money to invest, that's okay. It's not every organization is built for that, but that's fine. But what do you do to simplify it to a level that it can still be responsibly handled? And maybe you're bringing in a outside vendor that is trustworthy and can standardize it as much as possible. And that's a tough one, right? Especially in organizations that have a lot of legacy tools, right? Like, you know, you're trying to make things consistent across like a fabric that's like very old and probably has a lot of quirks to it.
Definitely, yeah. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, if you need something that like kind of scares people a little bit, right? Like data breach penalties, right? Like you know, you have to disclose to Secretary of State when there's data breaches of X amount. Like what's the financial penalty for data breaches? Like, does it apply to our org? SEC guidelines has a bunch of stuff, I think, for private companies, but there's definitely things that should be borrowed for public sector. Andrew.
Oh, yes. Hi, Julie. First of all, thank you for coming and talk to us and sharing your experience. Really appreciate it. What about in terms of your experience of OSs that you came across? Will you say Windows has a higher percentage of being breached, or that you do forensic on? Was it Mac OS? And now that we have IoT and with all these
right. Yeah.
EV cars, we have secure Linux, SE Linux. I mean, in terms of OS, how do you quantify that?
Yeah. I think like if I were building from scratch a system and wanted to use like what I thought was like the system that had the best chance of security, I would use SE Linux or BSD, you know, one of those, or one of the very stripped down OSs, like in both reliability as well as security, complexity is not your friend. You know, things that there's, right?
Yes.
You know, I mean, just think about like it just common sense and human nature, like keep it simple enough to understand, keep it simple enough to reconstruct, you know, because when problems occur, you already have many variables making it challenging, right?
Yes.
I have a bias because I started out in this business on Linux, right? So I'm going to just say that right up front, right? Like I have a bias towards Unix. I did have administered Windows systems. The part that I think is of substantive value is the transparency that's inherent in open source. You know, there's debates both ways, and then of course the classic idea that to many eyes, all bugs are shallow. But the idea is just that like when you're working within systems that are by their origin have to disclose everything, and you have a world looking at it, in my opinion, you have a better chance of maintaining a secure system with no surprises. Now, that said, there is something to be said for having enough people maintain a system, not having it rely on 1 or 2 people, not having it be a dead branch of code or a dead open source project. You know, there's some common sense involved in this too. The big companies have a point in terms of like having enough people to maintain it, but something that is very popular and well-maintained open source, to me, has a better chance of not having some strange surprises in there. That said, I think that the current administration at Microsoft does care about security, that they are a company that is known for eventually getting it right, even if the beginning version doesn't, you know. So yeah, on any new endeavor, like wait until version 3 or 4, and then it's usually pretty good. And I would say that they also have embraced open source, right? I mean, they bought GitHub, you know, and like they see that part of it. so I think that like, you know, like everything else, I would look at like, I think I would evaluate like Microsoft and closed source products a little differently than open source, right? Open source, you look at it in terms of, you know, tenure, longevity, like how widely it's used, how many people are maintaining it, and what's the stripped down versions, the most simple versions you can use. I think for commercial vendors, you would look at things like reputation, their trust network of vendors, what other vendors approve of them, and like what those vendors demand of them, because different vendors hold each other to different standards. You would look at like what is their what are their conflicts of interest? Do they have special contracts with certain organizations, and do they need to be might they have multiple things going on in that company, right?
Right.
And I might look at also the number of security advisories they have out on a certain product, how much effort you know that they spend on security for X. Do they have a security team that's proportional to at least 1% of the company or that project that's working on it? Do they have an accountable executive? Do they have a chief security officer on X product that's name and responsibility is on the line?
Sure. What about in terms of cloud security? Like I rarely heard like GCP or Azure, you know, or AWS, they have a bleach. You know, they don't really advertise that per
Of course.
se. I guess there's so many servers up in
Right.
the cloud. It's hard to pinpoint because they all commingle with open source and, you know, other app servers that run them. So you don't see like, well, I guess my question is, which is more secure in terms of the cloud vendors?
In my opinion, AWS is ahead of the rest on all of this, right?
Oh,
Like, because if you look at the number of features, like, and I haven't done a deep dive on this. It's worth analyzing, but like, I think that if you hear more breach announcements from AWS, I would argue that it is most likely because they are most widely used and they have the highest accountability factor. I think both GCP and Azure have been catching up in terms of like usage, like in like capture of the marketplace, you know. And I think the thing with AWS is if you look, they have a lot more security tools for people, right? Like they have, they've got the CloudTrail stuff. They've got like security groups. They've got like networking. There's different like, you can store keys privately. They just have more there. The other thing that they've done is they've segmented out their government cloud from the other stuff. I think that's also very critical, both for containing risks across both sides, as well as probably data confidentiality. There are probably certain you know, there are probably certain provisions they have to give the government that, you know, maybe regular citizens don't get. So, you know, I would look at all those things. How many features do they provide? How well articulated are the separations? And how challenged something is, you know, like sometimes something is, you know, generally I would say that like AWS is probably ahead of the curve on this.
I see. Yeah, I guess the mindset of the hackers is go by the most people use, like
Oh, yeah.
initially Windows users.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, okay.
completely.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I hope you're all getting a lot out of the security courses in general, and that you know, if you have questions about specifics for the course or generally about security as a job or like a career, feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Julie, so much. We have a in-person meetup later today. I don't know if you're gonna be at the Merit College, but we would love to see you in person as well. Maybe for all our mentors and speakers, we would try and do one of our get-togethers in person. Would love
That would be
to.
great.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you again so much. You know, I'll encourage students to reach out to you and connect to you on LinkedIn.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Cool.
you guys.
Thank you, Julie. Awesome.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Julie.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, and
Pleasure being here.
Kiara. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Carol, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't.
Okay. Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, guys. So what I'm gonna try and do is just cover a few things. So before we jump into, the reading and conversation for today's class, any questions you have? How's everyone doing with the labs? Is everyone kind of making good progress where you are with it?
For me, the labs have been good. I know there was a lot of labs this week, but I noticed some of them didn't take as long as usual.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just I'm just getting used to doing them again or what, but yeah. So even though there were a lot of labs, it took maybe half an hour, 40 minutes tops to do, a few of them. So it wasn't too bad.
Yeah. So sounds good. Yeah, there is a lot of work for this class, so it's not something you can just do on the side. So you definitely plan for at least 10 hours per week of work for this class. I see Nicholas and is still having issues getting into the lab. For anyone who is having issues getting into the labs, please email me. And when you email me, email your student ID and student email and ask for like a reset or access, whatever you want. Please email me. Do not send a message on Canvas, or do not send a message on Discord about it. Email is the best way to resolve any of the lab issues. So please email me. And I will also be in person today at school. So if you have any issues with labs or such, I'll bring my computer. We can look into that as well. Okay. So keep that in mind. What you're seeing on my screen right now is like, something Julie mentioned. This is like a pretty, you all have sort of talked about Kali Linux. So SANS, which is one of the premier cybersecurity education companies, has a workstation which is primarily tailored for doing forensic analysis. And so if you want to get a taste of tools and want to just play around with something, so this is one link I would encourage you guys to take a look. It's very hands-on. Pretty much most of the tools on SANS workstation, you can install them on Kali Linux. So if you want to just take a look at what tools people use and such, take a look at the SIFT workstation. So SANS has a virtual machine which is based on Ubuntu, same as Kali Linux, and it has a whole bunch of forensic tools, and they use this machine for their sort of forensics training. So a lot of tools which we will cover coming up, file system, like image analysis, network analysis, the tools, memory analysis. These are part of it, of this distribution. So you can kind of do hands-on experience with this workstation. It is not required, but I thought I'll share that with you guys. Okay, sweet, awesome. Cool. As we jump in, what I first wanted to make sure was we are set for reading and just sort of kind of see where we are with the course. So I know today we did these 3 chapters: report writing for high-tech investigations, expert testimony, and ethics, and we'll review those 3 shortly here. So next week, we are going to have discussion on what we learned today, which is basically working with Windows and command line systems. That's chapter 5. I know Lashanta, you had signed up to read and be the reading lead for that. We're still good for that, right? Lashant? Okay. Chapter 6, digital forensic tools. So some of the tools, I just talked about in self-distribution and such. Andrew, you are going to be the reading lead for it. Is that
Okay.
right? Yeah.
Yes, that is correct.
So then we talked about file systems today, primarily like Windows, Linux. We'll talk a little bit more about Mac as well, but we'll cover that next week. So chapter 7 is Linux and Mac file systems. Reggie, you are signed up for that. Is Reggie with us today? Okay. Is someone aware if Reggie is around? I just want to make sure we cover that. And then the chapter 8 is recovering graphics files. Rob, you signed up for that, right?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, great. Awesome. So let's have reading assignment leaders for these 5 chapters. Digital forensics, analysis and validation. Who wants to sign up for chapter 9? And preferably someone who hasn't volunteered still now. And I'll start taking names from the list here if we don't get volunteers. Michelle, am I saying the name right? Okay, who is signing up for chapter 9?
I can take it. It's okay. Just put my name, Abdislam or Kassel.
Who is this again?
Oh, Abdislam or Kassel.
Abdesalam.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So,
What about chapter?
So I'm gonna just do I'm gonna read the chapter and I'm gonna do the resume what it's talking about, right?
That's right. And then, create a thread in Discord and post your summary of the chapter in that thread.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. How about chapter 10? Nella?
Yeah, sure.
How about email and social media investigations? Let's see. Who wants to volunteer for these 3 chapters? These are great, very, you learn a lot.
I'll volunteer for number 11.
EJ,
Eric.
Eric. Okay, thank you, Eric. How about chapter 12? All right, we got Kevin, we got Ulysses, Thiago, any of you guys? How about Danny?
Sure, I'll take number 12.
Okay, great. Okay, awesome. And 13, cloud forensics. Who wants to do this one? Kevin? Jeffrey?
Sure, I'll take it.
Okay. Awesome. Perfect. So what will basically you will do is you will read the chapter, and you will be the reading lead when we do the group discussions for those. So these we will, so for next week's reading, this is chapter April 12th, which is this reading. We will discuss in class on April 19th. The following week is these two chapters, and then the following week is May 3rd. There is a chance I might move these chapters up to the April 26th week, so that on the final week we just focus on presentations. But so people 11 to 13, try to read those chapters sooner than before. There is a chance we'll probably just do it on April 26th week in terms of discussion, because those are like meaty chapters and they have a lot going on. So keep that in mind. Sweet. So what I want you guys to maybe just make sure is, in the threads here, see how people have created chapter 1, 3, so on and 2, so on forth. Create a thread with the chapter name, and then your discussion, like if like this one here, this is the discussion on chapter 1. Christina uploaded her summary here. So this is a great way to do it. So chapter leads can, or the reading leads can do something like that. Okay, sweet. I know we have 20 minutes, and then we are also meeting in person. So I will review what we are doing in terms of homework assignments. Again, the assignments for all the readings, the way you want to do that is, do the reading and take the quiz. The quiz is available right now. So this is week 3 quiz. If you have missed any of the quizzes or assignments, you can go and complete them. If all the quizzes and assignments are open until the last day of the class. So you don't have to ask for permission to submit late, just submit them. The week 3 quiz is open, and the reading for it is the reading which we just discussed. You can take it multiple times, okay? And so in terms of assignment, the assignments for NetLab is lab 5 and 6. So they are a little bit meaty labs in one way. And as completion of the labs, what I really want you to do is, once you complete the lab, maybe write a two-page note on like what you learned from those labs. Not each lab needs to be 2 pages. Both labs could be 2 pages, and that's your assignment. So this week your assignment is lab 5 and 6 from NetLabs. Okay.
So sorry about that. So do we have to write 2 to 4 pages, or if we write that, let's say just we have write down like just 1 page, that should be fine or not?
No, 2 pages, 2 to 4 pages, and it's all labs combined. So both labs. Yeah. What you learned from the lab. Okay. It should be fairly straightforward to do that. Okay. Your status reports are these are basically what you're doing every week. You just submit them. They're 1% of the grade, so they're 10 points each. So the status reports for this week is also kind of due. So okay. Sweet. In terms of modules, for this one, today's module was forensics methodologies and file systems. All the content which Julie discussed is available here as Windows Forensics Part 2. The additional stuff which she discussed, I will upload it here as well. Okay. So you will, I think it was this one, the additional material. We will we will have it here as well. Cool. Okay. Sweet. So that's for this week. Any questions so far? Let's maybe talk. Go ahead.
Oh,
Can we
sorry, I just
discuss
wanted to
more
ask
the
about,
forensic case study?
Yes. So you have question?
I had a question about the final project.
Yes, go ahead.
The tools, so when I was looking at what was posted for the final project, it said something about working with another professor. I put it in Discord. And so I had a question and clarification about how this is being submitted. And then what tools do we need for this, or is that for us to figure out and download ourselves and all that?
Yeah, so we'll talk a bit more detail next week because I'm also waiting from the other professor to get a bit more details on like where they're putting things. There is a chance we might have to update it a little bit. But the place where you would probably the assignment says like that Sarah has a process, but if you want to get familiar with what it looks like in the final case presentation, there is these two files you see, forensics fundamental case. So this is basically the case study. This is the details of that, but there are two parts to it. One is a trial, which is like something you can just like get used to it, and the second one is your project. So there is a test one, and then there is the project. And so you should, in order to get familiar with it, don't go by the assignment case study, but go for resources here. You see the resources here?
Yeah, so is that zip drive, is that the trial?
That is for, yes, that is for the BRG software, yes.
Okay, so the BRG example there is not the actual case study, it's the trial.
That's right.
Okay, so we're not being, okay, so it sounds like next week you're going to have more details on final project. I guess I'm a little confused because we're not going to be graded then on the trial, we're going to be graded on something else.
You will be graded on both. You have to do the trial as well. So if you are trying to get started, get started with the case study, and there is a chance like we might actually do the final presentation a bit different, or so it is this case study is half the points. So it's the trial case study is half the points. So if you want to, this case study is half the points.
So the trial, when you say half the points, are you saying that the trial is 250 out of the 500, or that the whole thing is half the class, 500 out of the whole class?
The trial is half the final presentation points, so it's 250 points. The final case is 33% of your class, 1/3 of your grade.
Is it possible for that to be like that the trial is being graded separately as 250 points? So it's clear, because right now it just looks like one big lump sum.
Yeah, it will. For now, it's going to be that way. Because when you present, you also show your trial. So when it's sort of been graded, it will be combined. So that's why it's combined.
Okay, so the actual case study then is still sort of TBD in terms of what it's going to be.
That's right.
Okay. Okay.
But in order to get started, please get started with the BRG software trial here. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess
and all the details for it are in here in your resources. So I would, just to make it simple, I would say, because this is available to you, just sort of do it as if it's your final case study. But the points for it as 250, and it's something which you can kind of do on your own.
Okay, and then for the final case study, we're working in teams.
Yes, you will be working in teams. If people who are late and want to choose doing it themselves, they can do it by themselves, but I encourage you guys to form teams of 2 to 4, not more than 4. But I would say 2 to 3 is ideal in terms of that. And so, get started with this BRJ software case study, create a report for it. There is that, and so just in terms of points, it's going to be 250 points, and then your final case study, which I'm still waiting from Julie, that I will give next week, and that will be kind of similar, but it will be 250 points. Yes.
Thank you.
Is everyone clear on the final presentation case study here? So what you have here
I'm
is
not
all.
clear. I feel like if I wanted to get started now, which I would love to, I don't actually know what to do.
I feel the same way.
Maybe I'm alone in that, but I'm a little lost.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way.
I don't know
It
what you
sounds
just.
like we're supposed to start.
Same
with the
here.
file. That's sort of what I'm gleaning, is that we're supposed to start with the BRJ on our own.
Yeah,
And then
so
they're gonna tell us later what the actual case study is, because it doesn't sound like that's actually ready.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
'cause I don't have a sense of kind of what the goal is. Like, I'm writing a forensic case report about the stuff that's inside the BRJ software data. And I'm using some of the tools like FTK Imager and stuff to look at the data that's in there, or
yeah, so
And yeah, and that actually is my second question, is are we expected to like download FTK Imager? Because I've only used these tools on NetLab, so I don't have them on my computer. So I'm assuming they're free to download.
yeah, they are free to download. We will go through the case study case by case, but next week. This was just in case you want to get started ahead, because for you to do the final, I want you to do a demo one, and the demo one is in your resources, and it is 250 points, and the details for your demo case study are in here, which basically will give you the BRJ software intrusion. So read that, and then the data for that is in the folder as well. So the case study details, and then the data, both are in your resources for final case study, and so that's your demo case study. Okay, so if you want to get started, do the demo case study, which is in resources for final case study, and then the final case study we will discuss next week. Yeah, is that clear?
okay.
So if you want to get started, click on CIS 60 Forensics Fundamentals Final Case Description. And then, the data for that is 06 BRJ software data. So if you open this, it will have data for it. The reason also is like there was probably a hiccup that some of this data got deleted in a NetLab's wipe, which happened last year or last quarter, I think. So the professor might not know where the details of it are. So we will figure out, but at least for the demo one, the data is here and you can get started. Okay.
And so just to be clear, we're basically going to enter that scenario described in the case description, and then write a case report based on the template.
That's right.
Okay, and how long should that case report be approximately? I mean, are we talking 3 pages? Are we talking 50 pages?
No, it needs to be less than 10 pages, but I would say 3 to 10 pages.
Okay.
So you will see, like, the data there will have some information for it and some network PCAPs and things like that. So you were supposed to, scan it, use the messages and such. So this is sort of the data with it, and the information is explained in detail. So you just use the tools, work that case study. And all the details for it are right here. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And also, like, a lot of it won't make sense until you do, like, network forensics. So that's why, like, it's a little bit catch-22 if you unless you finish all the labs in network forensics, that those case study assignments are not gonna feel comfortable. So just kind of, continue with labs, continue with modules, try to attempt the final case study, the demo version. If you get stuck, it's fine, because you have to work through, like, doing Wireshark analysis, doing, snort analysis, that sort of stuff.
So you're saying that we should do net labs which net labs do we need to do before we should really attempt the trial?
The network network and memory forensics net labs. This one, the NetLab 7, 8, 9.
Okay, so we basically have to jump ahead into the week after next in order to so we can't really get started on the final project like today based on what we've learned. We've got to finish week 4.
The final project is final project, so it includes components of everything in your class, right? So we're trying to jump a little bit too ahead. So why don't, like, and that's why I don't want to field questions like, how do I do, network analysis, because that is required in the final case study. So if you want to do jump ahead, then go ahead and look at the forensics case studies in detail. But I'm telling you, for it to be successful, you would require information from network forensics and such. But all of it is there. So, you can go step by step, or you can jump ahead. But if you jump ahead, then you just, be aware, like, you need information from all the modules in the class. All right, guys. Is there more questions? Sorry, like, I wasn't expecting to go into the final case study thing right now. So I don't want to confuse you guys. So, the information is there if you want to jump ahead, but, you do have a fair bit of labs to complete before you actually, like, are ready.
I think it's just that. Oh,
okay.
sorry. Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Andrew.
Oh, I guess for me, I'll probably do the lab first, and then I know the final project is worth half the grade points, I guess. But without understanding the labs is kind of hard for me, at least. So I'll probably wait on the final project until we finish the network part.
Yeah. So, your labs are worth 1/3. Final project is 1/3, and your quizzes are 1/3, just to be clear. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So
But if we have labs going up until the week before the final project is due, then timeline wise, like.
yeah, so the final project doesn't have any labs from, the internet and social media part.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
You just said to understand the final project, we would need to do all of our labs, which go right until a week.
You need to do network labs, at least.
Okay.
Go ahead, Craig, sorry.
No problem. I was just going to say that for me, I think it's just, I don't know. I see 500 points for the final case presentation, and I think, wow, that's going to be 5 times, for example, what the net labs are. And so it sounds like it's maybe really big, and consequently, if I can, I'd like to get started sooner than later. But maybe it's really easy and it's not that big of a deal. But I think that's the concern for me, and maybe the concern I'm hearing from some other people. I don't want to speak for other people, but so I'm just trying to get a handle on kind of what to expect and when I should expect to start working on it if I'm going to be successful. That's all.
Yeah, I expect everyone to start next week. That's kind of my expectation. So you have, and that's when I was planning to cover a bit more in detail. So from the plan of the class, I am going to start next week, okay? On your final, and that should give you enough time. Meanwhile, please
Great.
Work through your labs.
That's great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, all right. All right. So just to make things easy, guys, your final projects, you are expected to start next week. Continue working with your labs, your reading assignments. We'll talk more. If you want to jump ahead and look, all the information is there. I don't want to confuse you guys, so just ignore, like, trying to get started right now. All right. Sweet. So I think we are right at the time. I will call it a class because I know we have to travel and such. We will maybe discuss with we will do the combined review of this class and the conversations early next class. So we are probably a bit short on time there. So cool. All right. Sweet. So I'll pause here. Any questions, comments? Did people resolve their queries? Anyone more confused, less confused?
So do we have another speaker next week, Professor?
Next week we do have a speaker, yes. Next week we have a speaker, Sherman Kwok. He actually worked for the local FBI. So yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
So the meeting for today, in other words, is from 2 till 3, and then there's another meeting from 4 till 7, I believe.
Yeah, so it's informal, it's not required. If you want to meet in person, if you have questions, if you have something you're stuck with, like, if you need one-on-one time, I'll be at school. I think lab 11 is, and all the details I posted on Discord. So I'll try to be there by 2. I might run a bit late, but if you want to meet in person, if you have questions, feel free to come to school. And then there is an event at school, which is student meet and greet, as well as felicitation for Mark and Jim. That's from 4 to 7. So you're welcome to join either.
And we will be meeting in building R 110, right?
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. All right.
And so if you have, and I really wanted to make sure, like, if you have issues with your labs or computers or such, because I don't want, like, I still kind of hear some, if there is anything like that, then, it's easiest for you to come find me in person, and also meet other students. So, if you don't have any issues, if you don't have any questions, then just come right at 4, like, or like a little bit earlier. So it's kind of treated as office hours. Any other questions? All right. How was the guest lecture? Did you guys have fun? Did you learn?
Yes, it's very good.
I agree. It was good.
Perfect.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
Perfect. Awesome.
Professor, can I say something? Okay, so to be honest, it was good, like as far as information, but it was just a lot. So after you hear somebody talk for so long, you kind of start tuning out. And this is just me being honest because don't laugh, Andrew. This is just me being honest because after hearing her talk for so long, then it just was like, oh my God. So if we next time, like maybe next class, if there's like some interactive things that, it's like questions or something, like, how they'll have us do surveys or like fun stuff, that would make it a little bit more better because we know we're listening to answer questions instead of we're just listening.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, that's usually this used to be kind of 3 hours and we reduced it, but yeah, for guests, we are trying to just make sure, like, that's good feedback for sure. We'll maybe make it shorter.
Yeah, the reason I was laughing is because at one point I was dozing off too because I was awake at 3 a.m. driving Lyft this morning. So
Okay. Yeah, no worries. That's fine. Yeah, and that's good feedback. We'll maybe reduce the guest speaker time, and it's so that it doesn't feel a long lecture. Cool. Awesome. Any other comments, feedback? All right. How's everyone doing on labs and reading? Are people fine? Again, like, this class is a fair bit of work, so I don't want you guys to feel like, don't wait until the end. If you wait until like the last week, it's just impossible to catch up. Okay. So I just want you to be aware, like, there is a fair bit of work in this class, so make sure you do the work every week. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to catch up. Okay, sweet. Awesome, guys. I'll see you in person. I expect at least I think five to 10 of you guys had RSVP'd. Is that right? Like, or is everyone planning to come? All right.
Is there a Bagnell meeting today?
I don't know. Guys, do you know? I don't think so, but
Oh, okay, because it's after 12.
Usually happens every
I
Friday. I
think
don't
there
know.
is.
Yeah.
Oh, there is. Okay, awesome. All right. Okay, guys, why don't you jump into the Bagnell meeting and I'll see some of you guys in person later today, and feel free to send me an email for anything lab, and then message me on Discord or your channel if you have any questions or such. All right. I'll see you guys next week. Otherwise, take care. Bye.
all right. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
you.